y'all. I'm CQ, a playwright and a former writing fellow at the Realm. Let's be real. We did not step into writing for the theater because we imagined making the big bucks. We started writing plays because we love this form and what's possible on stage. But we also know that it's nearly impossible to survive on playwriting alone, unfortunately, even if we wish we could. That being said, I see you, and in the wise words of theater maker Amy Hayes, artists are like weeds. We will always find a way. I'm here to talk about some of the ways, both the ways I've found to make it work and what I've gathered from elders, colleagues, friends over the years about how to survive and thrive in this wild industry of ours. Of course, this is just a starting point. What I hope is a helpful starting point. Transparency is really important. I really believe that the more we share about our experiences and compensation at all levels in this field, the stronger we all are. Let's talk about what's right for you, full-time or freelance. It's important to know whether you're the kind of playwright who needs or wants a stable full-time job, or you're actually more comfortable working freelance. It takes all kinds. Feel free to replace draws and artist with writes and playwright. Why don't we lay out some of the pros and cons of going full-time versus freelance? We're going to start with full-time. Here are some of the pros. A regular paycheck. If you're on W-2 income, then you also don't have to save extra money for taxes, which is really nice. Benefits, healthcare, a 401k, retirement plan, etc. A built-in community of colleagues, a support network, which really can make a difference. Cons. Regular or extended working hours can limit flexibility. Limited vacation and time off, which really limits you for residencies, workshops, productions, etc. Also, often you have to use this time off for these reasons rather than ever taking a regular vacation, which is really important. The workload and job stress can make headspace and bandwidth for your writing and art making harder. Now let's talk about freelance. Here are some pros. Your time is your own, at least in theory. You have a more flexible schedule, and that can provide an ideal space for your writing schedule. Your availability for residencies, workshops, productions, etc. is more free, and you often have the ability to work from home on location if necessary. Now, here are some of the cons. Your irregular income. You must save 30% for taxes with 1099 income to be safe. And you also just have to learn to save more judiciously, period, for the leaner times. There's a lack of built-in benefits. You're going to have to find healthcare via a union if that's possible, or state-supported network. And you have to create an individual retirement account, which is important. Don't forget that one. It also can be more isolating. Working from home can be tough, as a lot of us learned during COVID times. And it can also be more exhausting when you're tracking a multitude of gigs, which give you also limited headspace when you're trying to focus on your creative work. Most playwrights or writers that I know make their livings in a variety of ways. Now, we're going to talk about a few common career paths. Now, first, full-time jobs. Some examples include high school teachers, nonprofit, foundation, academic, artistic administrators. There's advertising executives. I know a playwright who is a respiratory technician, network television producer, copywriters, those who are bartenders, teachers, aides, personal assistants. There's writer's assistants, of course, and the list actually really goes on. Now, also, of course, the combination of freelance work that we've discussed. So in addition to playwriting, we're considering commissions, fellowships, residencies, that sort of income, in addition to freelance journalism, adjunct teaching at universities, colleges, nonprofits. There's creative consulting. I do a lot of that personally. commissions, short form creative gigs, podcasts and other writing assignment or work for hire work, copywriting, translation, bartending. There's cater waiting, wait staff, working as a barista, part-time. And we all know that Starbucks has those really great benefits, part-time administrative or assistant work. And then of course you have to consider that there's also a lot of folks that a lot of playwrights who've been able to kind of get into the television and film work and sort of use both staffing and development work alongside their playwriting commissions, productions, fellowships, as well as teaching gigs. Now, most of these folks that I know are a little bit more mid-career, but there are definitely more emerging writers in that mix too. To work in the theater or not to work in the theater? Now, that is the big question. I knew very specifically when I came to New York for graduate school that I didn't want to work in a theater for my day job anymore. I worked in a theater for many years and I loved it. But coming to New York, I really wanted to be seen as a playwright alone when I entered a theater space. It was really important to me. Of course, this is not the case for everyone. Now, look at the wonderful Francisco Mendoza, who is a talented playwright and marketing manager at the Realm. Or another great example is Isaac Gomez, talented playwright and television writer who was a former dramaturg at Victory Gardens in Chicago. I think it's really important to ask around. One of the best ways to find out what works for you is to figure out what works for other people. Don't be afraid to ask playwrights you admire how they got where they are, or ask your contemporaries, how do they make it work? How do they manage their writing careers with making a living? This is how I got the idea in my head to figure out how to reduce to part-time at my former full-time job to make more space for my writing. That's semi-successful. We'll talk more about that soon. When I was in graduate school, I was working several part-time gigs to make ends meet. When I graduated, I knew that I needed a full-time job really to pay for my student loans and just to pay for my life in New York. When I graduated, I actually was hooked up with a temp agency through a high school buddy of mine, and I got a full-time temp job at a New York City-based foundation that works in the arts and the humanities. In time, I was promoted to a permanent position, and then I was promoted again into the role of program assistant. And I work specifically in higher education because I couldn't work in the performing arts due to the conflict of interest of working, as a playwright. And it was actually kind of lovely because I sort of had my side life as like working in higher ed, but then like being buddies with all the folks like in performing arts, which was kind of great. Coming to the foundation, my boss also always understood that I was a playwright, which was really nice. I used to joke that I was the playwright in residence and honestly used to get as much work done as possible on the job. It was actually like a really rewarding work environment with wonderful colleagues who came to all of my shows and all of my readings and always were asking me about my work. But I developed more and more responsibility in my role, and I was responsible for a large portion of the grant management for our program, which included interfacing with grantees, as well as processing reports, preparing for our quarterly docket cycle. I did get to a point where I realized that the full-time work was really getting in the way of my creative life. And despite how great it was in some ways, I really needed to make a change. Anne Bogart used to tell students, myself included, in her visiting director's class, that they should pick an artist whose career they admire and use their path as a sort of blueprint for how they wanted to build their own. Of course, everyone is different, but I think it's a really helpful exercise in the very least. Mine at the time was Lisa D'Amour, because she's also a New Orleans based writer, and she kind of works in both the commercial realm and the kind of downtown, more experimental realm. And I always loved and really appreciated that she kind of did the best of both worlds. And as an artist personally, who works in a lot of different ways and a lot of different mediums, I really admire that. Also, she got back to New Orleans, which is #dreams. I think it's really important to know that the right gig may change and can change. Just because you take a full-time job now doesn't mean you might not shift into a more freelance lifestyle later, or vice versa. And there's nothing wrong with going between the two. Out of graduate school, I worked full-time, as I mentioned before, the administrative foundation gig. And after, several years, I was finally able to combine savings, fellowship to allow me to shift into a more freelance lifestyle. I worked as a writing consultant at a downtown high school, and I was also personal assisting to the former president of a major arts organization. It wasn't an easy shift, but I felt as ready as I was going to be. And thankfully, the universe rewarded me for my plunge. Not that I wasn't hustling. It was not a joke. I know quite a few examples of artists who've made big leaps like my own. For instance, a friend this past year moved into freelance podcast producing and directing quite successfully from her full-time role as a bookkeeper. A few years before that, a theater producer bud transitioned from a full-time role at a historical museum downtown into freelance producing and directing. You can do it too. Nothing is permanent. Find your job's unexpected benefits. The number of scripts I've printed, readings I held in the meeting rooms at the office after hours. I even had the opportunity to launch an experimental theater project at my old workplace. Not to mention the built-in audience I had. My colleagues were always thrilled to come to shows, readings, etc. They became, and many still are, some of my biggest fans. I still get emails, honestly, from them oftentimes when I send out information about my work. Sometimes I would even go into the office early or on weekends to have a quiet space to work on my writing. Long story short, take advantage of those resources that you have while you have them. It sounds basic, but also there are so many ways that our day-to-day interactions impact our writing. Your job is valuable even down to that person-to-person contact. Honestly, especially down to that person-to-person contact, those characters that you're meeting and interacting with every single day. There are countless ways that my jobs have impacted my writing, ways I didn't even fully realize until later. I also really encourage you to find a playwright-friendly job and also make yourself invaluable. Often in New York and in other places, you can find full-time positions where your staff members and superiors are supportive of the fact that you are a playwright or artist. This is important and sometimes can lead to opportunities down the line to move into more part-time or consulting roles, or give you the capability of leaving for longer vacation periods, for residencies and fellowships that you want to attend. Not all jobs are like this, of course, but I really encourage you to find a job where you can be an out playwright if possible. Yes, you might still be an admin or whatever the role may be in title, but I think ultimately it's valuable for your colleagues to know and respect your work as an artist. I know for me personally, it always made me feel better to be able to say that I was a playwright, even in a workplace where I was seen as an administrator. So Charles Mee, the playwright Charles Mee, the downtown, known as kind of a downtown theater artist, was one of my mentors in graduate school. And he told this story that I really kept close, especially as I was searching and looking for a necessary full-time job. For many years, Chuck worked as an editor. And after a certain amount of years in one position, he asked his supervisor if instead of his yearly salary bump, he might negotiate to have a few hours in the morning before work that he could use to focus on his writing. In other words, he was trying to buy back his mornings. So every year he asked for another day until he'd actually arranged for 5 mornings of the week that he could devote to his writing rather than an increase in his salary. To him, the time was more valuable. And honestly, hearing this story, I literally clung to it. And in my head, I was like, I am going to create a situation where I am invaluable at my job and I can buy back my mornings. Now, I had made a really grand plan to go down to part-time at my job. I was sort of fed up. I was ready to leave in some way. And I was terrified, and I decided I was going to request for my programmer role to be moved to part-time. Now, instead, my supervisor could not give me that, but she did offer me a temporary contract part-time role that served as an amazing bridge into freelancing. And honestly, I'm not sure that I could have made the plunge, even mentally, without having that little bit of a cushion when I made the change for myself. This one's really important. I know I kind of alluded to it before, but it's so, so important to make sure that you save, y'all. We're artists. I know it's really hard. I'm not a financial expert, but I really think this is so vital. I was lucky that when I had this full-time job out of grad school, I was actually set up with a retirement plan. If your job includes a 401k, awesome. If not, I really encourage you to set one up for yourself. You can totally do it on your own. You really don't want to be out in the cold where you're old. If you have family members, that are going to be relying on you in any way, just really think about that. It's important. I know you don't want to think about it. I don't blame you for not wanting to think about it, but please think about it. If you are working as a freelancer, working off of 1099s, make sure that you're saving 30% of all income for taxes. As I mentioned, it's probably a little more, and it'll be a nice surprise when you get a little bit of money back. 10% for retirement, 10 to 20% for savings, if you can, especially if you're planning an exit strategy from a current job. If you can't do this, just save something. Honestly, even $20 to $50 per paycheck. Every little bit counts. I promise you. So you're putting those little pennies aside. They're going to really help you when you make a big shift for yourself. Make sure you carve out your time and space to write. Yes, you have to be good, or at least decent at your money job or jobs, whatever they might be. But please don't let your writing fall by the wayside because of it. Are you a morning person? Great. Rise early, do your pages then. If you prefer the weekends, awesome. Lunch breaks, nights, do whatever works for you and whatever page count you can manage. Just don't stop. So long as you're writing, I'm gonna get emotional about this. So long as you're writing, you are a writer. Of course, don't kill yourself. Burnout is real. You got to work hard to set those boundaries. Try to keep your day job or your freelance work hours contained, but don't stop writing. Other playwrights are really your greatest advocates. I really believe that. Playwrights look out for one another. Find your community, join a writer's group, find your people, rely on your playwrights to bolster you, answer questions, share words and pathways. I can't tell you the countless ways so many playwrights have really helped me in just a million ways. Don't forget the play and playwright. I think that part of being a writer is living your life. And it's really easy to get swept up in all the professional stuff and the hustle of it all, especially for those of us who are New Yorkers, I think. Just remember that at the end of the day, you probably started working in the theater because you wanted to have fun and live. So don't forget to do that in the midst of all the hustle. Understand your goal. At the bottom of it all, there is a reason that you write. That will get you through the times when your day jobs are totally grinding your gears and you're wondering, why on earth would I ever pursue this crazy dream where I can't make a real living? You've got to remember at the bottom of yourself why you're doing it, and that will help you move forward. I hope. You should know when it's time to go. The wonderful playwright Matt Smart gave me some of the best advice of my life when he said, the time to leave your day job is when it's getting in the way of or negatively affecting your writing. Of course, sometimes change can't happen so quickly. I really understand that, depending on your responsibilities and whatever expenses you might have. But it's a really good rule of thumb to keep in mind. And I know his words were really in the back of my mind as I made the decision to ultimately shift from my full-time role. Honestly, that transition really was in the making for at least 6 months, maybe a year before I actually made the shift. You should know when it's really time to go. Elizabeth Gilbert tells this great story in her book, Big Magic. It's about a talkback when a writer said his writing was making him totally miserable, and what should he do? Her feedback was, stop. I just loved that so much. I mean, we've heard it 1,000 times, but nobody is begging you to be a writer. Of course, we just can't forget the "what I did for love" chorus line, anyone, of it all. Otherwise, I really think, is it worth it? For me, it always is. But the answer may be different for you. And it may be different one year versus the next. And honestly, that's okay. I believe that once a playwright, always a playwright. A friend, my first ever playwriting professor, Carol Carpenter, was hustling for years in Los Angeles, New Mexico, New York, and now back to the Southwest. Finally, a few years back, she decided to take a break from writing and focus on her career in communications for a nonprofit, where she did very well, then moved into academia, where she has also been quite successful and risen the ranks as vice president of the institution. I spoke to her not too long ago, and I asked her about her writing, and she actually told me she was really happy that she needed this. She needed to take a break from her writing, and she knows she'll probably come back to it, probably in retirement. But for now, she's okay stepping away. I'm really inspired by her. In my mind, she's no less of a writer. In fact, many of her plays have moved me so deeply, and I'll never forget their imprint on my life. I really believe that there's no one way to be a playwright. To summarize, find the right gig. Ultimately, your career is yours and no one else's. What fits your needs in terms of your work-life balance, your comfort, your income, your level of flexibility might not work for your best writer bud or your colleague or your friend from grad school or college or whatever. That's fine. Remember, this is about you. Make your work work for you. Whatever your money job is, make sure it's feeding your art in some way. That can be anything from supplies to free food, to community, to inspiration. Don't forget to be a playwright wherever you are. You are a writer, whatever your job. Keep writing, keep persisting, keep submitting, keep connecting, keep making. If writing great plays is what you want more than anything, you won't stop and you will get somewhere, even if it's not necessarily where you expected or on the timeline you originally imagined. Maybe in some ways it's better. I think about when my play Scissoring, which I used as my thesis for grad school, didn't have an opportunity for production right away. Honestly, I really thought that the play was going to get lost in a drawer. And after being presented at the Candida as a finalist, that was kind of it. But then 5 years later, I got a call from Lou Moreno at Intar, and they wanted to produce the play. And in many ways, because it was 5 years later, I was able to do rewrites and make the play stronger than it had ever been. Change happens. Life is full of unexpected twists and turns. There's nothing wrong with changing your trajectory at any point and doing it all over again. Despite what anyone might say, career paths are rarely, if ever, straight and narrow. Playwright, I hope this gives you a window into how to make things work for yourself as you navigate this wild theatrical world. Thanks for listening, and thanks for writing. I honestly hope we have the chance to meet in person someday, because as far as I'm concerned, one of the best things about being a playwright is getting to know and love other playwrights and their work. Onwards, my friends. You got this.